Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Dojo Setting. Today we are going to finally finish up our Rick Scale series. Before we dive into that, make sure you like and subscribe. Follow me on Instagram. Drop a like on the videos, helps us grow a little bit. So so Rick Scale. Just a little recap. Rick Scale was sort of proposed by a French setter, Tonde Catillo, and a means to better understand the difficulty of a climb. So Rick stands for risk, intensity, complexity. I'm not really going to get into what those three things are. We've already done videos on those. If you haven't seen them, go check them out. But in the context of a climb, how do we use them and why do we use them? So one of the big things is in competitions, and it sort of it very much translates to commercial setting as well. It gets boring if you keep asking the climber to do the same thing, especially in competitions. If you're only asking them, hey, can you do these really, really hard moves? You're not finding out who the best climber is. You're figuring out who can pull the hardest, and there is a difference there. So with that, in the context of competition, you might have a risky boulder. You might have an intense boulder. You might have a complex boulder. It's not to say that a boulder only has to be this one thing, but you certainly have a focus on it. For a commercial setting, it gets really boring if you have the same style of route every time. People are going to get bored. So mixing it up, having some different ideas on how these things work. So how the Rick Scale sort of works, when you set a boulder, you kind of assess those three components on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being pretty light, or like an easiest version of this, and 5 being the most extreme of it. So we could have a boulder that is, okay, let's say this thing is probably like a 3 for risk, maybe like a 2 for complexity, and like a 1 for intensity. You could have a boulder that is like, okay, this thing is really risky. This is a 5, but it's not that hard. The intensity is probably like a 2. And how do you figure it out? It might be like a 3 or so. So it's just kind of gauging where that difficulty lies. Is it hard because it is physically demanding? Is it hard because it's hard to figure out? Is it hard because it's kind of low percentage? It's insecure. So, and again, to restate, a boulder can have components of all three of those things. It doesn't have to be strictly like, this boulder is risky, it is not intense, it is not complex. Every boulder is going to have some sort of level of all of those components. So, for a commercial standpoint, those three things, in my opinion, are relative to the grade. So if you're setting, let's say like a toe catch on a V3, intensity may or may not be, that could be sort of middle of the road there. Now, to an experienced climber, a toe catch on a V3 is it might not be risky. It might be pretty easy to do for them. It might not be super low percentage. It can also be very obvious that you have to toe catch. So to a V6 climber, a V3 toe catch might not be super complex. It might not be super risky, but to the target audience, to the V3 climber, that is very risky because that's possibly a new skill set that they're trying to learn. And because it's a new skill set, it's also very complex. If it's not something that's in their wheelhouse, they might not be able to figure it out. So it's all relative to the target audience. You could have an intense V4 that to the V7 climber doesn't feel hard. It's not intense. But to the V4 climber, it's very intense. It's really physically demanding. So it's all relative to the target audience. So what we are going to do, I'm just going to look through some sort of older footage of some boulders that we have set, both for competitions and commercially. And we'll sort of go by and I'll give you my breakdown of how the Richt scale applies to these climbs. So let's do that. Okay, so this is a relatively easier climb on the grading scale. I would say risk is probably a 3. Those feet on the volume are actually kind of bad. The intensity, 2 maybe. It's not, bicep-y. Complexity, 1. It's very straightforward. This one, not really anything too risky. You'll see right here, I kind of have a smear foot section, so it's easy to slip up there. Intensity is ultimately the name of the game on this one. This was a V4, 5, if I remember right. Probably a 3, maybe 4 on intensity. These pockets aren't quite as deep as they may look. And then complexity, 2. Maybe. It's not a very complex climb. Alright, this one's crazy. So this is a climb that is very tricky to figure out. Risk, not a whole lot of risk involved in this thing. I'd give it maybe a 2-ish. The finish hold is blocked. There's some more dynamic moves in there. Intensity, I would say this is probably like a 3 or 4. Pretty intense climb here. And then the complexity, you had the upside down sequence, and now you're recycling holds. Fairly complex. I would say it's a solid 4 or so on complexity. I remember when our competitors climbed this, only 2 people actually figured out going upside down. So very complex climb here. And I apologize for my sloppy footwork. Alright, this one is crazy. Alright, we've seen this in other videos, but it's one of my favorites. This thing is super risk. It's 4 or 5 or so. That move right there, you commit to that, or you're coming off. Even the finish hold is blocked. It's very tough to, it's very low percentage. Intensity, this climb's really not intense. It's maybe like a 2. It's pretty low. And then complexity is up there as well. Figuring out that sequence at the end or at the beginning there definitely makes the the complexity maybe a 4 or so. Alrighty guys, so there is the Richt scale in a nutshell. Man, we could talk about the Richt scale for hours. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it, but as a general idea, there it is. Thanks for watching. Keep checking back. We have a lot more coming soon, and we'll see you next time.